Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Journey to Accreditation, Standard 7. This is the final standard in the Australian teaching standards, and I hope everyone has been enjoying this journey. We're joined today by Chloe and Anne-Marie, and hopefully everybody else who sees this on YouTube will also enjoy it. If you do enjoy the video, please like it, please subscribe. It does help on my end. I actually use the data of people who watch the video and like and subscribe to the video. And I'm hoping to be able to take that to NESA or to be able to take it to the Department of Education to make a case to say there needs to be more support for casual teachers, short-term teachers, and long-term teachers in terms of their accreditation. Okay, so let's get started. Standard 7. I'm just going to set up the chat here. Can you guys both see that? Perfect. Okay. So for those who are joining or who have not seen any of the other videos before, today the journey ends with Standard 7. The videos will not end. I plan to probably do something over the holidays when I've got a little bit more time to be able to offer some Zoom sessions to everybody who wants to just check in, get some advice, get some help, and hopefully we will get some people on their way to becoming proficient teachers and getting that nice little pay bump. All right, so today we'll be doing a review of Standard 7. I'll be talking about the evidence you can use, strategies for collecting evidence, and my example, and talk about annotations, my annotation example, and a question and answer session at the end. Okay, Standard 7, engage professionally with colleagues, parents, carers, and the community. Standard 7 is, of all of them, Standard 7 is mostly focusing on you meeting your legislative and policy and ethics requirements of being a teacher. Standard 7 is actually quite wide-ranging, so it gives you a great sort of standard which you can just practically use any evidence to be able to justify and say that you have met Standard 7. But just reading through them, 7.1.2, meet codes of ethics and conduct established by regulatory authorities, systems, and schools. So what that means is the government, the Department of Education, or if you work in an independent or Catholic system, what those ethics are, and that you are meeting them and you are engaging with them. If you work in the Department of Education, you may be familiar with the Code of Conduct, and the Code of Conduct is our sort of go-to document for in terms of helping us understand the ethics around our job and situations that might arise. 7.2.2, understand the implications of and comply with relevant legislative, administrative, organization, and professional requirement, policies, and processes. I think it's often spoken about in whispers, but not really spoken aloud, that we are legal entities within our state and within the country. We have a duty of care to not only our students, but we also have a duty of care to children that we may see that may be or could be coming into harm's way. We have a legal and moral authority to keep an eye on them and to make sure that they are safe. So we have to understand what those implications are of our actions in terms of the law, our actions in terms of the department, and our actions in terms of any policies or processes. This is not meant to be something in which we're worrying about all the time, going, oh my God, I need to second guess myself every time there's a new situation or something that's come up. 7.2.2 is just simply asking that you understand. You're not meant to be a lawyer, but you need to be able to at least show that you understand your role as a teacher and your role with the law and your role with the departments. 7.3.2, establish and maintain respective collaborative relationship with parents, carers regarding their children's learning and well-being. Now, as casual teachers, it might be a bit hard sometimes because you don't really have the possibility of being able to develop that relationship with a parent carer in regards to a child's well-being, but there are opportunities for you to be able to do that. For instance, if you work in primary school and you're letting kids go to meet their parents at the gate, you might be able to have a nice friendly conversation about something that might be of concern in the classroom. Again, you may not know the student, or you may not know the parent very well, but you can at least be approachable and say, this happened today, I just thought I'd let you know. It's just something that's able to demonstrate that you are always thinking about the child's learning and the child's well-being. 7.4.2, participate in professional and community networks and forums to broaden knowledge and improve practice. Bit of a typo there. The New South Wales Casual Teachers page can be used as a professional community or as a professional network. Pretty much any Facebook page can now be used as a network. In this particular case, networks that are professional just simply means that they have professionals that are engaging with it all the time. Doesn't necessarily have to be one of those networking meet and greet at a professional development or at a social gathering to be able to meet that standard. Right. Let's talk evidence. So as a casual, a lot of people often find that this can be a bit challenging, but I assure you that at least with the standard 7, it's actually quite easy. So the first piece of evidence you can use is to appropriately de-identify meeting records, emails, and other communications which show an understanding of mandatory reporting requirements. So this doesn't necessarily mean that you're going in and doing the decision tree, where, if we think that there's some harm coming to a student, that we need to do the decision tree in conjunction with our principal to find out what the next steps should be. Sometimes it needs to be showing that you have an awareness and that you are trying to make the faculty and the school and maybe even the carers to be aware of something that is a concern, whether that's a learning concern or whether that is a well-being concern. Chloe had suggested a report on Central, a screenshot of a situation. I would only suggest that you use a screenshot from Central if you really genuinely feel that it can help you tell a story in your annotations about why that central entry is used as a piece of evidence. Now, what I would suggest if you wanted to do a screenshot on Central is to have a screenshot on Central of whatever it is that you'd like to do, an email showing that you were collaborating with your colleagues or you were collaborating with different parties about that issue that's been raised on Central, and to be able to have an outcome or to be able to show some way in which that student has been able to get a happy outcome, or at least the situation is ongoing. The thing is with Central is you can use it. Your supervisor should be telling you whether they're comfortable having that used as a piece of evidence or not. There are some pieces of evidence that, like an IEP, for example, or there could be something in well-being where you're talking about, something that is maybe not a negative, but certainly something that you might want it to have be a data record. Like, you might say, oh, I had a situation where we didn't realize that a student had an allergy. So you might make a medical incident in Central. You can screenshot that, and then you can say, as part of my legislative requirements, I've made an entry in Central about a medical issue. I'm following it up with the school leader or the appropriate person, and we are taking action to ensure that that's followed up. Does that make sense, Chloe? Okay, moving on. Annotated lesson and or day plans, teaching materials, resources, and or assessment that abide by copyright laws and show appropriate credit given to sources, including colleagues, websites, books, and journal articles. We use a lot of resources all the time. We use worksheets, we use worksheets, we use videos, we use textbooks even. And so if you are doing a lesson plan or a day plan and you have the ability to be able to include where that resource came from, or that you have the appropriate copyright license to be able to give or use that piece of resource or materials, then you should be able to include it, and that will help you meet standard 7. Inquisitive, you mean Inquisitive the website? Yeah, so yeah, you can use that provided you put that on your lesson plan, that you say, we are going to Inquisitive to study history. These are either the authors or the date that something was published or something like that. Something in which you are making sure that it's not your own, you're not taking something and saying it's your own work. You're able to actually say in your lesson plan or in your scope and sequence, this is where we get it from. This is the appropriate reference. And that's just a good habit to have. Can you write it as an annotation? I suppose you can. You can say that if you were to write that as an annotation, I would probably write it in a way that in which you are, if you are using that resource as a focal point of your evidence, if you're saying, I teach history, I go to the Inquisitive website, I have structured my entire learning sequence around the use of this website, then you can kind of fold it in and explain how you referring to it and having an awareness of it on your plan might help you keep track of, what resource you're using, who it's by, and then you might say, I went out and I searched for additional resources made by this person or additional resources referencing this thing from this person, from the resource that you used. And that's a really simple way of doing it. Like if you want to champion a certain resource that you want to use, then I would say, by all means, go ahead. Yep, you can reference the state library. So, if you are referencing the state library, you might do that. The only way in which I could think you could do that is when you're doing maybe year 10, year 11, or year 12, where you are encouraging students to start being more proactive in their own research, using the state library, using local library, using resources available to them. And so long as you put that in your lesson plan and state explicitly, I'm teaching students to be able to go and use this resource from the state library because they have the resources that will be useful for their study, etc., etc. And then you can say that it meets your legislative requirement to meet copyright laws. Make sense? Okay, moving on. Notes or other communications which show permission being sought from students and or colleagues for the use of their intellectual property where required. this one's a little bit interesting. It's mostly to do with a student that may have completed some work. So you might have students that have completed some artwork, or they may have completed a poem, or they may have completed something in science, where they have completed or they have produced something. And where you might want to be able to have that conversation with that student, or even from a colleague, where you are explicitly asking for permission to be able to either display it or use it as part of your teaching or part of the school community involvement. It's usually good, like usually more often than not, like you'll have the school faculty will be like, this is a great piece of work, let's get us permission slip for signs, so then we can use this either on our website, in another class, for a fate, things like that. You can also make scripture coordinator. Yes, I think you can. Yeah. I think if you are a scripture coordinator and you are coordinating with other, I suppose, non-teachers like the priest or the religious bodies that are coming in to teach the students, yes, you can use that communication. What I would do is I would probably have two or three different emails. You're showing different communications with different suppliers. Emails, absolutely emails. And you could just have something where you are contacting a local faith organization, text message. Yeah, you can do that. You'll be able to do that, and you'll be able to say, as part of the Department of Education's requirement that students complete 40 minutes of scripture learning or non-scripture. Yeah, you'd be able to do that. You'd be able to incorporate all of that and be able to say, in my role at the school, I am the scripture coordinator. These are the people who I speak to. This is how I organize it to make sure that we are meeting our obligations for scripture, non-scripture at school. I think that could really work. I have a suspicion that somewhere in New South Wales, Chloe's just punching the air in pure joy because that she does scripture, and I think she just won something. All right, moving on. Lesson and/or day plans which show evidence of implementation of mandatory policy documents. This basically means that if there is a specific policy that you are referring to, that you have shown how you have implemented it. The best way to be able to do this actually to look at the code of conduct and to match it to where it is that you're building your lesson from. Best way to think about this is to think about ICT, or to think about computers and websites. So there are certain behaviors and there are certain content that we as teachers need to screen, and we need to make sure that if we are having a research lesson, or if we're having a lesson where students are using a computer, we have understood the policy and we have incorporated that into our lesson plan to be able to say, students don't have access to YouTube. The video that I want students to access has now been made available on ClickView. This is to ensure that it meets the copyright and licensing laws of Australia. Therefore, for my lesson plan, in reference to this policy, I've directed students to go to ClickView to watch this video. ClickView is amazing. Right, moving on. Professional learning undertaken regarding relevant legislative, administrative, organisation and professional requirements and teacher accountability. Basically, any professional learning that you've chosen to do. And this gives you a bit of a range to specialize. So, for instance, if you were going, all right, I want to learn more about the scripture requirements in New South Wales. So you might go and do some professional learning about that. You might say, I want to do more learning about behavioral management strategies. So you might go off and do some learning about that. Anywhere in which you have seen or felt that there is a lacking in your own ability to be a teacher. So long as you can link it to a learning or a well-being outcome with the student, you can use that as standard 7, and you can say, I've had to undertake this professional learning regarding the law, or professional learning regarding administrative things, such as with Central or with other admin programs. Or if there's something within your school, an organizational approach where you need to undertake some learning, and how this all comes back to you and helps you be more accountable as a teacher in your role. Okay, next one. Classroom student management plan, which shows the implementation of school and system policies and procedures. So you might have heard of the positive behavior learning model, PBL. That's basically what this is referring to, although your school might have a different one. Basically, you either have a school policy of a escalation process where you have a student issue that you need to escalate, or as a classroom teacher, you might have developed your own method of escalation. And that might be that you have figured out a way to be able to say, there are certain steps that I'm going to take before things are escalated. The great thing about this one is that you can incorporate individual learning plans if you have access to them, or individual behavior plans if you have access to them. The BEH management flowchart. What is the BEH? Yes. So you can take a classroom management screenshot or the PBL flowchart and just talk about how you have incorporated that into your own classroom. Now, as a casual teacher, obviously it can be very hard to do this. So you might focus on what the school has already got in place, and then you can build off on that and find ways to incorporate it. For example, I remember I had a student who used to get sensory overloaded quite often in class. And if I knew that if I follow the management flowchart as written, he would have been, quite regularly seeing the head teacher or seeing the deputy or seeing, even learning sport almost every lesson I had him in. So I worked with him and we negotiated and we came up with a strategy where we came up with a flowchart for him, where I said, look, what's a good way in which when you are feeling overwhelmed that we can work on this together? So then we have a flowchart from the school, but we'll have a flowchart in the classroom. And he was able to suggest some ideas, and he ended up being able to cope much better as a result, because instead of me having to follow the PBL flowchart, I was able to understand, and he was able to understand what the appropriate responses were going to be. So that's something that you can say that you can also adapt. So when you're talking about flowcharts, you should also be talking about their adaptability to you as the teacher and to you as the classroom. Right, you might have evidence showing a communication demonstrating compliance with relevant legislative, admin, organization, and professional requirements. Basically, if you have an email or you make note of a verbal conversation that you had where you are bringing a concern, you are raising something to a head teacher, to a deputy, to a principal, that you were able to show some evidence of that communication happening, and that can be used as evidence. It doesn't necessarily always have to be a negative incident. You might say that there is, there might be a student that is struggling and that student needs to get more help. Or it might be that you have a student that you're really proud of and that you want to have them to maybe go to a national debate or maybe go to a state debate or something like that. You want to be able to show that you are communicating effectively to make sure that you're not hiding anything. You're showing that you understand that you have to be compliant with communicating clearly and effectively. Right, some other evidence. You can use meeting records, emails, and other communication which show an understanding of mandatory reporting requirements. This one is the serious one though. We all have had to do the training for child protection, and we have all had to do that with regards to the decision tree that we can access through the portal to be able to to be able to input the data and to be able to get the appropriate response that's provided at the end of the decision tree. But first and foremost, you should be able to make sure that, and it's a legislative requirement anyway, that you have either an email stating your concerns. And if you have done the decision tree, you will get a reference number, and your principal had to provide you a reference number. You can use that as evidence if you want. And that's entirely up to you. They'll be up to you, your supervisor, and the principal. Just bear in mind that anything that had the mandatory reporting element in it, obviously you have to de-identify it, but it's also quite a sensitive matter for all parties involved. So you've got to be a little bit careful if you're going to use that as a piece of evidence. Moving on. You might have examples of opportunities for parents or carers' contributions to homework activities, newsletters, and other school community activities. So what that means is that you're communicating with a parent, and a parent has volunteered to join a homework club, or you might have a parent that is volunteering or and does work with the school newsletter, or you might have a school fete. You might be communicating with the parent about that. Even as a casual, it could be something as simple as putting your hand up and saying, I volunteered to come in. Any way in which you are showing a communication that is positive or at least productive between you and parents and carers meets standard 7. Okay. Notes from observations by your supervisor or your mentor, for example, in meetings, during assemblies and community meetings, on excursions and parent-teacher meetings, showing that the teacher establishes and maintains a respective collaborative relationship through the use of appropriate language, tone, and body language. So this is generally a really good one if you want to highlight the journey you've gone through with your supervisor to become proficient. So you might say, okay, look, for standard 7, I really want to highlight the, I'm going to get to the observation report in a minute because that's what I use for mine. But you want to be able to show that maybe, okay, over the report period, I was working on the report for say a month, 2 months. During that time, I have email correspondence with my supervisor, providing feedback. I have notes of verbal meetings that we may have had. Just something in which you are able to demonstrate that you have a good collaborative relationship with your supervisor, to be able to not only just do your proficient report, but also generally in the day-to-day operations. All right, you can also use written reports and records of student progress, letters home, and other written communication with the parent school that follow school protocols and demonstrate respect and collaboration regarding the child's learning and well-being. As a casual, this one might be a little bit harder because that's generally the classroom teacher that would do a lot of that. However, you might have an option, a opportunity where you have to collaborate with or speak with a parent or a carer. And so long as that you are understanding that there is a protocol and a procedure from the school in speaking to that parent, you can then be able to use that as evidence, provided, of course, you're showing that you are being respectful and collaborating with that parent. It's it can sound a bit self-serving when you put up a piece of evidence and say, see, I was being respectful to this person. So you would need to add a little bit more context so that we understand why you were being respectful. It might be that you were bringing up a sensitive matter to the parent, and that you wanted to ensure that the parent felt comfortable talking about that sensitive matter. Or it could be that you have a colloquial language type of communication with the parent where it's like, using very Australian idioms or sports metaphors or something, and you're talking about how, you have established that relationship and that communication channel with that parent, and why this would be a respectful dialogue between you and the parent. You can use planning documents for meetings with parents regarding their child's learning and well-being. Again, as a casual, probably not going to happen too often, but if you ever get a chance to do parent-teacher night, or you ever get a chance to actually speak to a parent, and you have an appointment and you schedule the time to talk to a parent about something, you can make some notes and get some planning documents, so then you can show that you are planning ahead and you are looking to making your communication clear and effective. You can do validated attendance at beginning teacher and professional networking meetings, including online educational forums with reflections that show how knowledge has been broadened and all practice has been improved. So again, professional development, especially if it's online, if it's like Zoom meetings or Skype meetings, or even if we're all now allowed to go into buildings now. So, something where you're able to get some sort of validation, usually a certificate that is able to show that you went or that you have attended a networking or educational forum of some kind, and that you were able to produce something to show that you actually were there and that you contributed to that day. You might have a printout of an excerpt of online professional or community networks. For example, beginning teachers, which show participation to broaden knowledge and improve practice. The New South Wales Casual Teachers page is also an excellent source for this as well, as there are people who will often put up a question regarding the job. And if you're able to screenshot, obviously de-identifying everybody else, but if you're able to screenshot, say, a question that was posted and your response in the comments, you can use that, provided you're using several of them. If you just put one up, that might be just a bit too simple. So 2 or 3 screenshots will be good. Communication, which shows participation in professional and community networks and forums to broaden knowledge and improve practice. I know I keep saying it, but it really is a good resource. Facebook groups, especially obviously New South Wales Casual Teachers page, but other ones as well, like English Teachers Association, History Teachers in New South Wales, Technology Teachers New South Wales, Math Teachers New South Wales, things like that. These are all networks that are very easy to access, provided you understand that they're closed networks. And then anything that shows you communicating and engaging on that. You need to be able to show your name or show that you are replying to a thread or something. You can't just simply screenshot anybody. But it could either be you putting up a question and getting some answers back, or you offering an answer in the comments. You can just simply take a Photoshop, a screenshot of it, and you can use that and say that that's your communication with community networks. You can use records of activities undertaken in a professional network, similar to the reading log that I showed you last week in Standard 6, where you just make yourself a simple table, and that you just simply list anytime you are engaging with any professional networks. It is legitimately the best way that you can say, if I want to justify scrolling on my phone for 3 hours through a Facebook group page, sure. And finally, the observation report can be used, and it is a legislative requirement. Fun fact, I use my observation report, and I'm going to explain how and why in a moment. Yep, I'm about to explain how you can use your observation report for Standard 7. That's all coming. Now, strategies for collecting evidence. As always, look to the work you've already done. You've likely already made it. If you haven't got it, make it. Implement it, use it as soon as possible. If you are booked at a school in advance, speak with the person you are leaving and ask if it's okay if you can plan a lesson. Even out of field, you can still use it as evidence. And rest assured, if you're covering a teacher and you contact them well in advance and you say, I would like to do your lesson for you, plan it, implement it, all of this, is that okay? It's very, very rare that they're going to say no, because it means you're making their job easier. Standard 7 can be overwhelming as it focuses on your legislative duties as a teacher. You are not expected to know the intricacies of the law, but rather to demonstrate that you understand your obligations to act legally and morally within the role. That's basically what you're showing. You're showing that you understand your role as in a position of great authority and respect in the community. And the law is a great equalizer. It's meant to just simply be a way for us to say, this is what we all have to do to meet the law. Right, let's have a look at my evidence, shall we? Now, bit of a story with this one. As soon as I can find it, give me a second. Here it is. So I was looking through the standards, and I was looking through a few other people who volunteered. By the way, can you see my evidence? Uh-oh, I made a mistake. Hang on a second. Hang on a second. Yeah. Sorry, I made a mistake. Fortunately, this is a closed video, so I don't see too many people getting upset with this one. All right. Chloe and Marie, can you see this? Okay. So this is my observation report. Now, what's interesting is I was looking around and I was actually starting to struggle a little bit with Standard 7 because I got caught up in the idea that it had to be something extremely legal, or that it needed to be something that was extremely, I won't say negative, but like serious, like mandatory reporting or something like that. And then I actually came across another report in which someone actually used their observation report. Now, what I actually did is, with the observation report, for those who don't know, it is the official report observation that your supervisor does of you. So what you do is, let me just rotate this. You have to fill in the planning stage yourself. So you need to be able to demonstrate and you need to show descriptors of what you're doing in the lesson. The key bit is here is that you do not need to do Standard 7 descriptors for your observation report to put this as evidence for Standard 7. So you do your observation report, which is your observation as you would normally do it. You plan it, the strategies that you plan to use, the impact that you hope to have in the practice. You then have the actual observation. And this is done by your supervisor. So my supervisor came in on a lesson that I was doing when I was doing Minecraft education. And I structured the whole lesson around them working towards building a house within the Minecraft coding. It required, my supervisor, sorry, who wasn't very familiar with Minecraft, to kind of just pick up and see how the lesson was moving along, and how I was trying to push the kids to be able to do some independent learning on their own. Because that's the thing with coding. You can, it could have been very easy for me to have given them the code, but they needed to be able to work out a lot of elements on their own. And then there was the reflection. And the reflection in any observation is that you sit down with your supervisor and you have a chat about it. You talk about how the observation went, areas to improve, whether the supervisor was happy or whether the supervisor would like something else to be done. So this was done halfway through last year. Now I did my observation at the tag end of having collected all the other bits of evidence that I was ready to use. Okay. Before I go on to the annotations, does anyone have any questions? Okay, very drink of water. No? Okay. Perfect. All right. So, yep, we'll do that in the question and answer session. Right now, just a check. Can you guys see the PowerPoint? Okay. All right. So just a brief recap. I'm sure Anne-Marie and Chloe have heard me say this a gazillion times now, but I apologize. The purpose of each annotation is to explain how and why the selected evidence shows that your teaching practice meets the standard descriptors. Annotations should provide the context for the evidence in order to situate the work, such as the what, who, why, or the when. Annotations should identify and explain how the evidence meets the standard descriptor, and annotations should articulate the impact on student learning. Here we go. Now, annotations should provide sufficient detail so the evidence can be understood by others outside of the teacher's context. Basically, I should be able to give this to any random stranger on the street, and they should be able to look at the evidence, look at what I've written, and understand what I'm talking about. Write your annotations in Microsoft Word or in a writing program. This will make editing a lot easier. You can edit when you put it into ETAMs, but it is fiddly. So it's easier to have it in a Word doc first, then you can just transfer it over, copy and paste. Keep the language simple, accessible, and professional. Annotations should be between 300 to 500 words. The Nether ETAMs do have a word limit. I've been meaning to find that out. I keep always saying I'm going to look that up and then I forget. Your supervisor will be reading your annotations. Your TAA, your Teaching Accreditation Authority, usually the principal, will have access to your annotation. They will only have access to your annotations after you've submitted your report. So once you have turned in your report on ETAMs, it then activates on your supervisor side, and then your supervisor can read it. It is usually expected that you show your supervisor everything before you submit. Okay, this was my evidence annotation for Standard 7. It's quite wordy. I apologize. I am going to have to read it all. So here we go. The lesson was observed by my supervisor. The observation of the teaching is a compulsory component of practice, which allows informed feedback on technique and capabilities. Standard descriptors 7.1.2 and 7.2.2. The lesson took place in the Stage 4 class, 16 students, and involved students developing code using the Minecraft education program to have their agent build a simple house. The lesson was conducted in the school computer room. I articulated the lesson and also wrote them down on the whiteboard and introduced the lesson by recapping previously learned content and building upon it. The lesson then moved on to independent learning as code was compiled by students using a range of methods and tools available to them. The assembly of code has some core principles students can employ, but the structure of the code can be done differently to achieve the same outcome. have the age to build a house. I created checkpoints for students to assess their progress and to manage their time effectively, and wrote these on the whiteboard. Through the lesson observation, I was able to engage with dialogue with my supervisor regarding my teaching practice. A particular note was that students should be encouraged to make their own checkpoints so that they might build resilience and be self-sufficient in their learning. Basically, I said that this one was a lesson that was observed by my supervisor, and then I summarized my lesson. You'll note that I didn't really talk too much about the planning element of it. I just went right in and I just spoke about how that lesson actually went. And in doing so, instead of referring to the descriptors over and over again, I simply put the descriptors up at the front and then explained the whole process of my lesson. I summarized the observation report for those that were too lazy to read the observation report. And what I found is that for standard 7, you have to do an observation by your supervisor. That's just no way about it. What you do in ETAMS though is you load your observation report as your evidence 7 or as your standard 7 evidence, and you explain how that meets your legislative requirement or policy requirement as being a teacher. Because you can refer and you can say, you know, in order for me to be proficient, I need to be able to do this report. So I'm going to include that as part of my standard 7. ETAMS will also ask you to load up your observation report as is, meaning with no annotations on it. So you basically scan it and then you upload it as a separate document. So so in the ETAMS, it will look like you have the observation twice, once as evidence, once as its own requirement for you to be able to submit your report. However, there is no explicit rule currently saying that you cannot use it as a piece of evidence. Any questions? How can I use the observation report for other standards? Okay, so if you wanted to cherry pick and go through the different descriptors, you can. So if I was to think about it, you could probably use it for, I want to say standard 2, maybe? Give me a second. I'm going to check that record on my own actually before I give the wrong. I will put it, you could probably use it as standard 2, know the content and how to teach. And standard 2 and standard 3 is what I would say you can use it for the observation report. So if you wanted to use the observation report as another piece of evidence somewhere else, you would probably put it for standard 2 or standard 3. And then you would just have to pick which descriptors you want to match it to it. I personally put it to standard 7 because it's required. And if it's required, I might as well use it for a legislative requirement. Right? Hey, you're welcome. Okay. There we go. And now we're at the end of the video. Now time for some question and answers coming up. Just yeah. Does anyone want to write any questions down for me? Okay, question from Chloe. How long can the evidence be valid for? I think I may have answered this before, but to recap, from the day you start teaching to the day you submit your report, everything inside of that period is counted as valid evidence. So there is no time limit. That's why they generally give you 5 to 6 years to do the report. That being said, your supervisor may want to see more recent work to be able to, so then that's closer to the submission of your report. However, if you can justify it and if you can say, no, this evidence that I have really does help me meet the standard, even though it might be 2, 3, 5 years old, it still helps me meet the standard because, as explained in my annotations, X, Y, and Z. So there's no time limit. The evidence does not expire. Right, ETAMs, sorry, Anne-Marie has a question. I noticed on ETAMs that you can load 30 pieces of evidence. Does it matter if you haven't done that over time and you just load 5 required in the week before you submit? Yes. You simply upload the evidence that you want to upload. You do not have to do 30 pieces of evidence. I personally think that's overkill to do 30 pieces of evidence because, frankly, who has time to read all of that? So long as you've written your report in a way that you are comfortable with and you've satisfied your supervisor, so your supervisor is able to say, yep, all these evidence that you've collected have met the standards. I'm happy with the annotation that you've written, submit it as is, and then turn it in through ETAMs. They'll get it on their side. The supervisor will then write their report on you, how you met the standards. And then once your supervisor submits that, it goes to your TAA. And depending how quick your TAA is, it can generally be turned around within 24 to 48 hours. The evidence does not need to be approved by your TAA. That's the supervisor's job. So your supervisor is the one that will be looking over the evidence and will be ensuring that the evidence is to the standard that he or she is happy with. The TAA will have the final say on your evidence and annotations, but that is after having read the supervisor's report. So ideally, yep, so what will happen in ETAMs is you do your report, you put up all your evidence, you turn it in. Supervisor will then get an email notifying them that the person he or she is supervising has turned it in. They get to open it on their side, so they get to see your report. They then get a new function opened up on ETAMs where they write their report on you and your report. So they'll get 7 boxes, and in those 7 boxes, they type their thoughts and views on you as a teacher in regard to the standards. They should also be talking about the evidence. So then they're saying, Josh did X evidence and was very interesting, and I can see how that meets the standard, etc., etc. So they write their 7. They hit submit. So then your report, supervisor's report will both go to the TAA. The TAA will then have a choice to open up the entirety of the report and read it as they want. So for instance, they can read all the evidence you submitted, they read all your annotations, they can read your supervisor's report on you. Now, if you have a piece of evidence that your TAA is unsure of, or your TAA is uncomfortable with in approving, they should be at least contacting you first. They should say, look, we need to book a time. I've got your report here that I've got an issue that I'd like to talk with you about why you may have chosen a particular piece of evidence. This is why, but this is also on the supervisor as well, because the supervisor will be called in to say, you approved this as the supervisor, why have you done so? You get a fair hearing, like the principal or the TAA will talk to you and work out why that evidence might be in doubt. It's very rare that it's in doubt. The principal will then, or the TAA will then have two choices. They just have a really big fat button where they just click it and they approve it. And then within about 45 minutes to 2 hours, the person who did the report will suddenly go from graduate to proficient, and happy days. The TAA or the principal can reject it, but if they reject the report, they actually have to fill out a form, and it's on the ETAM system, and they need to explain why. And they need to give a very, very good reason why they are declining a report that they've received. Their reasons can vary. Generally, it can be dissatisfied with the evidence, dissatisfied with the teaching practice that's been demonstrated, either in observation or in the annotations, shoddy, poor quality of work, where they may just have thought that the report was terribly compiled. Again, though, that would also go back onto the supervisor. Again, it's very rare if they reject. If they do reject, you do have an appeals process. So you can receive the rejection from the TAA, and they say, it's a no-go. You can then go to NESA and lodge a complaint and say, please review my report. My principal or my TAA is declining it. I'm not sure why. I disagree with this outcome. And then NESA gets involved at that point. So yes, they can reject it even if you have had your observation complete. Again, if they do reject a report, which again, I must stress is very rare. If they do reject a report, it is as much a reflection on the supervisor as it is on you. That's why you have the supervisor. The supervisor is meant to take on that responsibility of guiding you through not just writing the report, but guiding you through the understanding of the standards and how you're meant to reflect them. So like I said, this is why you need to be able to develop that report and that collaborative approach between you and the supervisor. Again, that's why I also suggest that you write it on Word, because you can write something on Word, things go wrong, and then you can email back and forth, or you can have an open document where you can say to your supervisor, hey, I've written this, have a look, what do you think? And your supervisor can maybe edit on the spot or give you some feedback. But generally, what you should be able to feel confident with is that your supervisor is confident in your evidence and your annotations, has seen you teach, and is happy to have you turn in your report, write their report on you, and then hand it off. Anne Marie asks a question: is it best for everything to be uploaded as a PDF? Yes. If you have an image, JPEG or something like that, you can do that as well, but PDF is probably the best. PDF is also secure. So when you upload it to ETAMS, it limits the possibility of somebody editing anything that you put up. Not to say that people have, but we live in a day and age of hackers and what's not. So it's easier to just put it up as a PDF. I think the file size can be smaller too, if you compress it. Any other questions? Okay, I think that does it, and that is it for Standard 7. It's been a journey. I hope I've helped you. And I do hope that you all are able to watch these videos and have felt a little bit more confident in the evidence you can collect and the annotations that you can write. Do know that there are plenty of people out there that have been in the same boat as you. So there are a lot of people who have felt a bit unsure or have lacked confidence in being able to approach this. I assure you, once it is done and once you have turned in the your proficient report and you get that email from Nessa, you will wonder why you panicked so much in the first place. And then it's going to feel good. And I wish you all the best of luck. Bye.